Good morning, Dan and Amy. While Attorney General Barr was pantsing Democrat socialists on the House Judiciary Committee, and that's not a pretty picture, particularly if it's Nadler's pants.
Yes, please keep them on.
And they were focused on reclaiming their time. Any moment they allowed Attorney General Barr to actually offer an utterance.
I'm reclaiming my time.
News that Attorney General Barr made, as we mentioned yesterday, was the appointment of a U.S. attorney from Texas to look into the unmaskers from the previous administration. And this was a topic that Maria Bartiromo picked up over at Fox Business in a very spirited exchange she had with one Valerie Jarrett, the former right hand of President Obama. Still, I think.
She's backup mommy.
Housemate, yeah.
Yeah, she lives in the east wing of their home.
Valerie Jarrett, top advisor of President Obama. And it's very interesting, the approach that Valerie Jarrett takes, which will come through quite clearly, which is to say, hey, old news. This is all these matters are unresolved, okay? There is a pending Durham investigation, but it's old news. We need to focus on the present. Why can't we do both? Why can't we focus on unresolved issues of the past as well as on pressing needs in the present? I think we can. Nice try, Valerie Jarrett. Maria Bartiromo, to her credit, wasn't having any of it.
If people want to have an investigation about what happened 4 years ago, they should do.
The minimal things you might want to do is you could use.
Let's try that again.
If people want to have an investigation about what happened 4 years ago, they should do that. But aren't you concerned about what's going on right now? Aren't you worried about the integrity of our upcoming elections? Aren't you worried about how we're going to have a safe and fair election?
Yes, that's why I'm asking you this question. That's what, Valerie, that's exactly why I'm asking you these questions, because I am a patriot and do not want to see people in positions of power put their finger on the scale and make up a story that there's collusion with a foreign power when there's absolutely no evidence of that. And if the powers that be knew that there was no evidence of that in early January, I want to make sure that we do not have the powers in government spying on political campaigns because the other political campaign paid for it. We know that Hillary Clinton paid for the dossier. So this was an election year. You've got one campaign paying for dirt on another campaign, and you've got the amazing intelligence agencies of our government weaponized. So that's what has taken place here. You're saying you knew nothing about it? You were President Obama's right hand. And a lot of people wonder how much President Obama directed this. So I ask you, did President Obama direct any of this?
That's not how it works. That's not how our investigations work. That we leave that to the intelligence community to bring forward information. And the dossier, I would imagine, would be one piece of a much bigger puzzle. And so if you're saying, is it important to make sure that there isn't influence? And actually, the Mueller report didn't conclude that there wasn't any wrongdoing. In fact, he was explicit in saying quite the opposite. And so I don't think we should read in where there hasn't been actually any conclusions to that effect yet. You're making statements that actually haven't been
just
proven.
To be clear, just to be clear, Robert Mueller said no collusion. Michael Horowitz, the IG of the FBI, said that the dossier was, quote unquote, an essential piece of all of this investigating of the Trump campaign. Essential piece was the word Michael Horowitz used. So you say it was part of a larger mosaic. We have no evidence of that. We only have evidence of the dossier.
Mm-hmm. We have no evidence of that, but that's not the perspective of Valerie Jarrett. That's not her job. Her job is to say things that aren't true, to misdirect, and to try to close off. The Mueller report says something quite the opposite of no collusion. No, it explicitly said no American colluded with the Russians to impact the 2016 election, which necessarily includes President Trump and his entire campaign. No American. That's what it said. So why would Valerie Jarrett feel the need to provide the gaslighting that she tried to provide on Fox Business? For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by John Yoo, Emanuel S. Heller Professor of Law at the University of California, Berkeley, and the author of the new book, Defender-in-Chief, Donald Trump's Fight for Presidential Power. Professor Yoo, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Oh, hi. Thanks for having me back.
I wanted to get your take on the import of that news that Barr made about the U.S. attorney tasked with investigating the unmaskings that were done at the end of the Obama administration, particularly as it pertains to General Flynn, but not necessarily limited to him. And then, that in context of the Valerie Jarrett argument that's shared by many in Obama world that, we just move on. This is all old news and so on.
It's not old news, but even if we're old news or new news, it's vitally important that we have an investigation and find out what happened. Because if what appears to be true is true, you had a serious violation of the norms and standards that have guided our intelligence agencies and the relation of we the people to our government. Because if what looks like happened, then one party, the one in power, used the intelligence agencies of our government to launch an investigation using all these great powers that were designed to go after terrorists or go after spies, and used it to try to investigate the opposition political party. This is what had happened in Watergate. This was what we thought was so unconstitutional that Richard Nixon should leave office and likely would have been impeached. Or perhaps maybe even worse in a way, you had people like Jim Comey, the head of the FBI, people in the higher ranks of our intelligence agencies, part of the permanent government, think that they had the right to decide who was fit or unfit to hold the presidency and elected office, and in a way frustrate the view of the voters themselves, which meant that part of our government was not accountable or responsible to the American people.
Well, what do you think President Obama's role was in all of this, if any?
It's hard to know, and that's why it's not old news, because we don't actually have the full facts yet. There is this discussion in some news reports now of a meeting in early January where President Obama and Vice President Biden and many other top leaders of the Obama administration discussed this investigation into Michael Flynn, even talked about or suggested, I think, unorthodox efforts to try to come up with grounds to get rid of Flynn. I just don't think we're at the bottom of it, because if that's true, then it's, I think, legitimate to ask, did President Obama know? I would have thought if you would taken this serious step of saying it's as if in the administration now, the FBI said, we are going to investigate whether Joe Biden is colluding with China to try to influence the results of the 2020 election.
Exactly.
You would think
yeah, exactly.
That'd be so serious that you would want the president to know and to get his approval.
For Valerie Jarrett, I wish Bartiromo would have posed that exact hypothetical. So you'd have no problem then if the Trump campaign paid for somebody to cook up a bunch of unverified information about Joe Biden. He turned that over to Christopher Wray so he could launch a counterintelligence surveillance program of the Biden campaign in advance of the November election. You'd have no problem with that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to get your take as well on something that I'm, sort of, it's mystifying on one hand, it's not on the other. Is there anything controversial about dispatching federal law enforcement to protect federal property, whether it's in Portland or Seattle or Chicago or anywhere else?
Well, this is a theme that I talked about in this book of mine that just came out, Defender in Chief, is that you have people who are so outraged at President Trump, who so want to bring him down. They are willing to make the most extreme arguments. They're willing to upend constitutional understandings in order to try to stop him. And so take this example of sending federal law enforcement to cities. If you were to read, let's say, the opinion pages of the New York Times, you would read people saying, this is the dispatch of an occupying Trump army to cities, that this is the beginning of fascism in the United States. This isn't fascism. This isn't an occupying Trump army. This is a power that presidents have used since President Washington on, including President Lincoln defending Fort Sumter, including President Eisenhower sending troops to escort kids to enforce desegregation, this is the power of the federal government to do two things. One is to defend federal buildings and federal property and federal personnel, or to enforce federal criminal law. If there are people behind these protests who are moving money and people between states, or who are communicating over the internet, or who are breaking drug laws or gun laws, then the federal government has always had a right to enforce the law, and that includes sending officers to try to arrest and try and bring people to justice who are breaking our laws.
And the idea that this is somehow in controversy among law enforcement is also fictitious. So there's a deal cut yesterday whereby finally the governor of Oregon has interceded, and she will dispatch state police to protect federal property, including that courthouse that the arsonist tried to burn down in Portland. And the federal law enforcement that had been dispatched will stay there as backup right now, letting state police take the lead. And if they prove that they're able to maintain order, then it's likely they'll be recalled by the federal government. I mean, it's just not a controversial event on the law enforcement side. It may be controversial what the rioters are doing or how the politicians are appeasing them, but in terms of the law enforcement and the interplay between the two, there's no controversy here.
No, in fact, I think what Trump did here is quite consistent with the constitutional design. I mean, the Constitution does say that, or does reserve to the states the primary job for public health and safety. But if the local government fails, or even worse yet, if they refuse to do their job, as seemed to have been the case here, then the federal government is there as a backup, as you said, to provide support, or even if again the state and locals can't do it, they have to step forward, because we should remember there are other people's rights involved too. There are the rights of protesters for free speech, but if they become violent and the city and state won't protect them, the innocent people who live in Portland, innocent people who live in Seattle, have constitutional rights too. The government is not allowed to just step aside and let its favorite groups commit violence against other people. This is a lesson of the Reconstruction, and after the Civil War, there were southern states that wanted to step aside and let the Ku Klux Klan do what they wanted to the freed slaves, and the federal government under President Grant went in and stopped them.
When you your book, A Defender in Chief, Donald Trump's Fight for Presidential Power, this was a topic that Joe Biden covered briefly in his recent press avail, where he said, he's a consensus builder. He knows how to bring people together in the Senate and on the Hill and so on and so forth, customary political path. But he said President Trump has tried to do everything by executive order, implying that he's acted unconstitutionally. And in point of fact, where he's done something by executive order that opponents of the order don't like, I mean, he has been routinely taken to court, and frankly, he's been routinely enjoined by federal courts. Some would argue too much so. Some would argue the extraordinary reach of the judiciary in terms of expanding its power at the expense of the executive.
Yeah, exactly. What I go through in the book is I tried to show that these claims that President Trump has been exercising presidential power illegally are unfounded. That for the most part, he is trying to use the powers office and defend the office from encroachment by Congress or by these judges you mentioned who try to stop nationwide the operations of the federal government, are things that presidents have long done and go back all the way to President Washington. And actually, if you think about it, the Obama administration was equally, if not more, aggressive in using executive orders. The one I would mention is this order called DACA, where President Obama said, and I have a lot of sympathy for these people too. President Obama said, I want these dreamers to be able to stay in the country, people who are brought here as children in violation of the immigration laws, but through no fault of their own. The statute doesn't say that. Congress didn't amend the immigration laws to say that. And so President Obama just said, well, I'm going to create that program anyway by not enforcing the law. President Trump came in and he tried to end that executive order. I think rightly so. He said, we're going to go back to enforcing the law. And the Supreme Court, remarkably, just a few weeks ago, right. I was shocked, said, no, you, President Trump, keep enforcing that Obama order. So who was acting more aggressively there, Obama or Trump?
Obama or Roberts or Trump. I would say Obama and Roberts. That decision, we talked about it on my other program, right? I mean, you can issue an executive order that's in force illegally, unconstitutionally, but the subsequent president can rescind an unconstitutional executive order. I mean, it's the most amazing decision.
Yeah, usually that's the main check on president's executive orders, is that the next president can always undo it. But here, exactly, you have a case where Chief Justice John Roberts joined with the 4 liberal justices of the court to force the president, here President Trump, to keep doing something unconstitutional. I think all because they wanted to reach this political outcome, which a lot of Americans like, which is to keep the DACA program in existence. So I've argued that, well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. There's not one kind of constitution that applies to Obama and a different one, a narrow one that applies to Trump. And so President Trump should and could use that power, too, to change immigration law and make the immigration system skills-based, or reward people who bring assets to the United States, or people who get PhDs in computer science at American universities, rather than Obama's favorite groups.
He is John Yoo. He's the Emanuel S. Heller Professor of Law at the University of California, Berkeley. His new book, Defender-in-Chief, Donald Trump's Fight for Presidential Power. Professor Yoo, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
This is Hugh Hewitt for townhall.com. If President Trump makes a comeback and pulls off yet another upset victory on November the 3rd, it will be because he relied on the disgust of the American people with elites. Trump will again run on a platform of America first, on rebuilding the economy he built once before until it was shuttered by the novel coronavirus. He'll point to his clear-eyed view of today's aggressive and assertive Chinese Communist Party and to the strengthening of our military buildup, a growing Navy, the Space Force, and the revitalized nuclear deterrent. Trump will also run on his massive deregulation and the appointment of justices and judges who are faithful to the Constitution. And often hysterical media endlessly chants the same anti-Trump refrains. But voters have to ask themselves, which man do they want squaring